Hello, everyone. This is Ed Brenegar, and this is the Eddie Network podcast. And my guest today is a return guest, friend, and colleague, Andy Wilkins. And Andy, welcome. And I look forward to our conversation. Um, I'll just say this that this is sparked by some things that Andy was sharing with some of us in a group of a month or so ago. And I said, well, let's talk about this because I think it's important. So welcome. How you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Ed, and great to be back and great to see you. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. It's been a while since our last chat, so we've got new material to explore together.
Yeah, we're both very busy, and it's nice that our ships are passing in the night now, as they say.
Exactly.
So, tell us a little bit about what you're doing, um, and this kind of frame of an idea that you're taking into some businesses and challenging how they perceive themselves. Maybe as a way to describe that.
Yes, so I've been fascinated by this question of what do we mean by value throughout my career, and done a lot of work for different organizations, different sectors, public sector, private sector, different industries to really think about it. What is it that people really need and want? Because I see so many organizations looking through the lens of the things that they do and trying to fit people onto their product and service,
Yeah.
whether it be a public service or whether it be a private sector service or a third sector service. And I've often wondered, what does value really mean? And I've been fortunate enough to undertake a number of projects where you can sit with people and understand what are they trying to do? What is the problems they're trying to solve or the opportunities they're trying to realize? What context does that sit in? Which reveals a much bigger story of opportunity than a lot of organizations are thinking about because they're trying to fit someone onto their product or service. So using this insight, really encouraging organizations to think a little wider, a little deeper, a little bit more human-centered, maybe. And especially with new technology arising and arriving, and the possibility for technology to be more intimately embedded in people's lives, feels that this question of what do we value is becoming more and more important. And what I'm seeing is a lot of organizations retreating behind their products and processes instead of venturing out to understand what does value mean in the world. And as I've been working with organizations on how do you translate that to a product or to a service, uh, I often run up against that even if you're successful at one level of being able to do that, the mothership organization to which that product or service is embedded has a way of thinking about the way it does things, as we've talked in our last conversation about this sort of more industrial, mechanistic way of doing things, that it's very hard for a value-centered, human-centered understanding to percolate through the organization and drive a sort of consciousness about this that makes it possible for organizations to intuitively and instinctively lean into that and be able to honor and respond to that in near real time, especially as things start to speed up.
Can
So
I ask
this,
you a question about that?
yeah, sure.
What do you think are the obstacles for that to be able to happen? That sense of value penetrating and throughout the warp and weft of a company. What are the obstacles there?
Well, I think as we discussed a little bit on our first podcast, I think most organizations draw their insights about how to operate, what does good look like from this industrial mechanized model. So it's how do we divide labor up in such a way that we can fulfill the tasks as efficiently as possible to produce the thing that we produce that we can then sell the most of for the highest possible price. So this need to sort of push product out into the world and do that as efficiently and as possible is an internal orientation to my own productivity rather than a curiosity about what does the world actually need and want.
Yeah.
And how do we use that to inform how we might come up with what we're doing in a different way, and how do we not only look at what we offer, but how do we connect to the people that we serve? This is a big thing that's now, I think, emerging more broadly around organizations, this whole notion of customer experience. So the work I did show that not only organizations are poor at being able to understand what value really means, and therefore a lot of products and services are suboptimally designed and are being pushed by ever more persuasive sales and marketing techniques to get people to buy the thing that's being sold, but also the organization's ability to nurture and cultivate trusted relationships in a world where there's so much choice, where things are moving so quickly and people's expectations are changing. Another sort of systemic level up from the products and services is, why should I trust this organization? How does it treat me and people like me as customers such that I would continue to award it some loyalty? So this question of how does an organization respond to the world that it finds itself in is now becoming a really important, bigger question. And a lot of this requires organizations to think about going on a journey of their own transformation. And this is an area that I've been thinking quite a lot about, is how do we think about change in a changing world, especially if our starting point is that we want to be most efficient and productive as possible. And what I've seen, and we'll come to the sort of insights that I can share with you at a bigger level, because I think there's something really, really interesting there. But most organizations are trapped not only in the productivity and efficiency, but a short-termism. It's like, how much are we able to sell? What are the targets we got to hit this quarter or this year? Because they determine the bonuses that we get, and we're accountable to our shareholders or political masters if you're a public sector. So this machine metaphor is crunching through. People are attending to the short term in ways that blind them to the bigger possibilities, but also trap them in a mindset that makes it very difficult to break out of that and transform to something better. So I've been looking at this for some time, thinking, is there a better way of thinking about this challenge? And I've come across a model that I've found and I now use extensively as being a really important way of sort of framing change in ways that are simple to understand, but also invite the change of mindset required to do something fundamentally different. And this is this 3 horizons model that you may be familiar with. If I give yourself and your listeners a quick description of that. So horizon 1 is
full description is fine. Full description is fine.
All right. Horizon 1 is all the stuff we're doing, business as usual. So we've got customers to serve or patients to attend to. There's the fury of business as usual. But that often is not just the things we do or the products we're selling. It's also the way we do things. So we pointed a little bit to siloed thinking, transactional thinking. We got to hit targets. We got short term, which then encourages us into a management and behavioral style and a mindset of thinking that corresponds to that way of operating. So when we're thinking about something more transformational, it's very difficult to think about that from within this mindset, because it is so all-consuming and all-encompassing that anyone breaking out of that will get usually tapped on the shoulder. What the hell are you doing? Get back in your job and do what you're meant to be doing. So 3 Horizons said, let's recognize that Horizon 1 dominates. That's the business as usual. But recognize this is a way of doing things. So is there a different way of doing things? So let's down tools on Horizon 1, step back, and imagine what we could be doing to make something distinctly and aspirationally better. What would be a better way of doing things now that we know what we know? We can see the technology that's available to us that wasn't before. We're not encumbered in this imagination by all the siloed structures and investment we've got in the Horizon 1. Let's think and dream about what a vision of doing things better might look like, one that truly serves the people we're here to serve. And let's think about what needs to be true if we could be able to do that. How would we be working? What would our institution look like? What kind of capabilities would it have if we had an ideal way of running our organization? And by being able to invite leaders from across the different silos or different parts of the organization to participate in that imagination is an aspirational view of what we could be,
Yeah.
our to be, if you like. And then holding that, saying, well, how the hell do we get there from all the Horizon One stuff we're thinking of? So what are the barriers that stop us? What are the things that make it difficult for us to break out? Let's recognize that those aren't constraints that should trap us into Horizon One. They're opportunities to innovate through and think about how do we transcend that towards this Horizon Three. And what that brings into view is what are the Horizon 2 things we can be doing? What are the transformational initiatives that can help us bridge into that future and break out of that Horizon 1 trap and start thinking about bringing about fundamental change that can bridge us to that better future? So this Horizon 3 thinking and the Horizon 2 transformation is a different way of thinking about strategy. Instead of how do we squeeze more juice out of what we got, is to how do we reimagine what we could be and how do we bridge to that world? And through my work more generally, that's taken me out of individual organizations right the way up to thinking about what could be the future of health and future of health systems. We know in health that it's massively siloed. If we take this sort of Horizon One and think not just as an organization, but Horizon One in healthcare is that we've got doctors and hospitals and primary care and mental health and dietitians. We've got silos all over the place dealing with pieces of health, but no organization or individuals responsible for holistic health. And we know our health comprises of all these pieces. So what could it look like if we put holistic human health at the center of our shared goal and aspiration? What does holistic health mean? What could it look like if we were to mobilize the new technologies, the new medical breakthroughs, and pull those pieces together and orchestrate them in a way that really addresses the individual and collective health of the people of our country? What could that look like? And what would be the Horizon 2 initiatives that bridge us out of short-term silos to a collective, systemic way of providing holistic health? And this has been an area that I've been pushing forward now in the UK for about 5 or 6 years, written extensive reports, been speaking at conferences and provoking people to get out of squeezing more juice out of existing health silos to reimagining health in the 21st century, and what is the collective journey of coming together to provide that. So this way of thinking really leads up, I think, to the big breakthrough that I shared with you before, and we were going to explore on this particular course. I was just really laying the groundwork to how I arrived at this place.
Well, let me say this. I love what you just described. And I have chills from hearing it because it does feel very hopeful that we can address the brokenness of organizations. And I'm listening to that in the context of my own health. I'm a healthy person, but I have biomechanical problems. I have lost hearing in this ear, and I have an acoustic neuroma in this ear, which has also caused me to have balance issues. I have vertigo. And then I had a hip replacement, but I have issues still in my hips that I'm dealing with. And I have issues with, just getting older. So I have some hypertension. I have all these different issues. I'm inside of a very large, singular health system that is managed through a technological portal.
Yes.
And all my doctors and all my physical therapists see everything that's in there, which I love because I see it all too. And so I am, in essence, being that kind of Horizon 2, Horizon 3 instigator of forcing them into talking to each other about me.
Yeah.
And so I had my primary care physician last week reach out to two of my other doctors. One is an ENT neurosurgeon, the other is a spine specialist, you know, to say, this is what we're seeing. We want you to know this, this is what we need you to do now. You need to schedule. And, but it's really my instigation of wanting them to work together for my benefit.
Exactly.
And this system that I'm in allows for that because it's very, very patient, as well as it can be, a very patient-oriented system.
Well, it's interesting when you look at how much we talked about the factory mechanistic model that industry took and how that's been applied more generally into the public sector, into health. So most hospitals are like factory production systems. You've
Oh
got
yeah,
so many consultants who deal with so many things, and you've got so many patients. How do you stuff them through and get them out as fast as possible per unit time and a unit effort, and how much you're going to charge for it, etc. But so we got a situation where we have an ologist for every organ of your body, but no one who's interested in you as a person and how it all fits together. And we built all these care pathways that sit off all the organ-based diseases and all the things that could go wrong. And increasingly, we're seeing an aging population with more complications, and most people will complain. It feels you end up feeling a little bit like a pinball bouncing around inside a system where people are interested in bits of you, but no one's seeing you or helping you to stitch it all together. And the more sick and
no,
old you get, the more you're having to stitch together your own healthcare.
you need a concierge
You need a concierge.
to be
Or
your spokesperson
yeah.
and facilitator of the system.
So, just to give your listeners a kind of flavor of some of the dimensions of this third horizon in health, one of them is, of course, see the person, not just an organ or a disease. Bring all of those things together. In a 21st century healthcare system, we should expect that a system could see us as a whole person and coordinate and integrate our care in a holistic way. So that's one thing. Another dimension is when we look at time and motion studies, people spend about 0.01% of their time in the presence of a healthcare professional, even if they've got a full sort of care package provided to them. They spend over 99.99% by themselves. So we talk about access to healthcare as though the health only happens in the 0.01%. Now we know with all these chronic diseases, no, health is won or lost in the 99.99%. When I'm out there living my life, am I looking after myself? Am I making the adjustments to my behavior? Am I taking my medications? Am I taking care of myself? Have I lost hope? What are the contexts I'm in, and how do I live with these conditions in a way that
Right.
fulfills how is access to life, not access to health? So how do we take health to the people, not just have it trapped in clinic-based conversations? So this is the huge opportunity for digital health and more community-based health, is taking health out to where people are to help them in the moments that they experience. This is more health coaching and life coaching as opposed to traditional clinical care. So that's another dimension of this third horizon. There's a couple more though. There's a huge breakthroughs coming through in science, medicine, and technology, and one of those is all the major classes of disease that we are afflicted by, like chronic diseases like cardiovascular or pulmonary disease or diabetes or dementia, all these ones that essentially cripple us and bring so much suffering and so much cost. Traditionally, at the moment, we wait until someone has a symptom, declares themselves into the healthcare system, and then are diagnosed with one of these conditions. But for a disease to have progressed to the point where you have symptoms, something has to have gone pretty wrong inside your body to have got there. So all these major classes of disease, it's now known that as we look at genes and genes express into proteins, and that would then affect how the cells work, and the cells connect into tissues and tissues into organs and organs into you, we're able to track disease further upstream than we've ever been able to do. So the ability to spot some of the biomarkers that the origins of disease or the beginnings of disease is starting to take root before you've got any symptoms. So new breakthroughs are showing us that we can spot for more and more of these classes of diseases biomarkers way before we ever get the disease. And there's a whole repertoire of interventions. Maybe it's behavior, maybe you can help your body heal itself, but maybe it's new medical breakthroughs that can head off disease.
Right.
Now, this is revolutionary.
Right.
And that means in the future, are we going to need as many hospitals? Or we got the opportunity through more primary care and community care and more diagnostics and new forms of treatment to have a new way of engaging the public in keeping them well as long as possible. And then you've got going even further upstream. A lot of the research has shown that 80% or more of the reasons we get all these chronic diseases are nothing to do with sickness per se. It's to do with the environment that we're embedded in, the behaviors that we are engaged in, the substances we're taking, the unhealthy food that we're consuming, the lack of exercise that we're involved in, the pressure and tension and stress and anxiety of life.
Right.
Now, there's almost nothing a traditional white coat and stethoscope clinical person can do about those things.
Right.
But if we broaden our conception of health, as I've been advocating strongly, to look at more holistic health and well-being, sort of human flourishing, if you want, what we see is there's a whole range of actors we can bring to the table who hold a piece of the jigsaw of that puzzle. So we constitute an overall picture of human flourishing, individual and collectively, bring those parties to the table and start coordinating and undertaking collective action around creating and supporting people to live more healthier and lives which have more meaning and more potential for flourishing. And also the contexts in which people live, which are so important. You can give people all the responsibility in the world, but if they live in an environment that's got mold in the in the rooms that they live, they're exposed to pollution, they haven't got enough resources to eat healthily, then almost the conditions are condemning people to poor health and poor health outcomes. So as a civilized society, recognizing human flourishing as being an important part of what we would want to bring to our population, how do we mobilize collective action at scale to address that? So this is the bigger, if you like, picture that I've been pushing hard in the UK and getting some success in. So it's exciting times.
So in order to get there, in order to elevate human flourishing to a level where it is a factor in decision making, the people who are in the top echelon of these institutional structures have to have some kind of consciousness change that allows them to see something that's different, that is not a threat to what they have been doing all along, but that it can build upon what they've done and maybe allow them to let go of some of what they've done so that they can go to another level of whatever the terminology is, human flourishing, than they've ever been before. But I would think that the real obstacle is not actually the systems, but the leadership of the system. So this is really a leadership problem.
Yes. So leadership, both in terms of organized institutions, but also leadership up to politics.
Right.
So what was very interesting about the work I did on 3 Horizons for Health is that it was in no one's interest to do it. The hospitals were interested in their yearly and annual figures and what they were going to achieve that year. The health system is working on very short-term time horizons. How do we squeeze more juice out of what we've got in the next couple of years? And how do we bolt bits of tech on to be able to do that? Policymakers are thinking about, well, what improvements can we squeeze out of the system before the next election, because we've got to get elected again, and therefore any big thinking about the future that I can't cash out before the next election is just wasted effort and time. I'm not going to do that. So all the way up the stack, it's in no one's interest to be thinking about these ideas that I've been spending my time thinking about.
Absolutely.
So as I was paid by one of the larger hospital groups in London to actually think about this question. And it was based around the idea that because we stand at the dawn of the greatest changes in science, medicine, and technology, one problem of the current way of doing things is that there's an increasing array of innovations and technologies and medical devices and medicines being pitched at the health system, which the senior management do not have the time to get their heads around. And therefore, what is a shiny new thing? What is strategic? It's very difficult for health systems to make sense of the innovation coming at it. And that's only going to accelerate. So I was given almost the dream project, and felt it was like a divine sort of calling, which was, Andy, can you go and look at these big mega trends in healthcare? What is coming down the road in terms of genetics over the next 10 or 15 years? What is this going to make possible in terms of personalized medicine that spots biomarkers and personalizes care for you? What's coming down the road around all these diagnostics and sensors that can measure all the things that we can't measure now, but gives us a true insight to what's going on in our lives and in our health? What are we going to do with all this exponential data that's going to be pouring in about individuals and population? How do we make sense of that? And if we've got all this capability, how do we engage the public in a different conversation? How do we take all this capability and be able to speak to and engage people in a different conversation? Because health is not just something a system does. Health is something we're actively involved in. We co-create our own health by the choices and decisions we make. So how does all this capability help that? So I got much grayer from spending a year looking at all these frontiers, really look at these mega trends, looking at what's likely to play out in the next 10 or 15 years around all these mega trends. And then the big bit of systems thinking was, imagine all of these mega trends have landed at scale. What could health and healthcare look like the other side of it? This is this third horizon. Because if we've got a North Star for the future of health and healthcare, and we reverse engineer that back to now, we've got something of a pathway to a transformative future revealed that can never be revealed if we're just trying to squeeze more juice out of all the silos we've got. Right. So this was the kind of breakthrough piece of work that garnered a huge amount of interest because no one had done this kind of thinking. It was in no one's incentive to do this kind of thinking. So policymakers, life sciences companies, the NHS in the UK, I've now had these reports downloaded over 1,000 times from around the world, from Saudi Arabia to the Far East. People are now very, very interested in how do we think more systemically about our healthcare system, because health, as we'll come into in a minute, is just one of the many crises that are burning in the world. We've got an aging population with more diseases and more things to prescribe. So if we just keep our current system as it is, recognizing there's an older population, more disease, more things to prescribe, there's an inbuilt inflation of about 4 to 5% a year. And anyone who's in your audience that does maths will realize if you have 4 to 5% inflation every year, 10 to 15 years time, you've doubled the cost of your health system. Now, for public payer systems in Europe, that's doubling the cost of your healthcare systems. In the UK, already 40% of all government spend is on healthcare. You essentially bankrupt the country. If you flip over to the US, where healthcare is already about 20% of GDP, it's now crossed the $5 trillion threshold. That's forecast to go up to 30% of GDP in the not too distant future. And that's going to make healthcare so expensive that either more and more things will be not qualify within your health insurance, or health insurance costs are going to go up so high that it becomes a massive constraint on people's quality of life. The ability to pay your health insurance is already an issue, and it's increasingly going to be a greater issue. So when you look at these bigger pictures, you realize if we keep doing what we're doing, that is an active choice to push all our countries further into a crisis. So we kind of have to do something. We have to do something around mobilizing our expertise and resources and skills and technologies to actually improve the health of the people in our country. not only is that good for runaway health costs, but are healthier people, are more productive people, they're a happier people. They're going to be more engaged in their lives, that of their family, that of their community, that of their country. We all win from better health. So broadening out our conception and what the benefits are reveals there is a shared collective opportunity here to do something fundamentally better and different for our people.
It sounds like you are setting up another conversation of mindset. And do we operate from an abundance mindset or from a scarcity mindset?
Yeah.
And I think what I see politically, particularly in the US, is that we're operating on a scarcity mindset and we've got to spend as much money as we can before it all crashes.
Mm.
And they are going to crash it because they are operating from a scarcity mindset. But an abundance mindset says there are ways for us to operate to enhance and expand
Yes.
what we're doing without it breaking us at the same time.
Yes. And so one of the other downsides of the short-term industrial thinking of maximizing the transactional bottom line is that it encourages us to do things that externalize harm.
Ah,
So if I can dump my trash in the river rather than recycle it, it's lower cost to me. I can make more profit. If I pay my workers less, or I offshore and outsource my low pay to the east and pay and use my suppliers to pay people ridiculous wages, then I can outsource that problem, make more profit, and be more successful. So what we see, and I think we all recognize this, that there are, if you like, externalities, as economists talk about it, think harms that are externalized to the environment. Maybe they're pollution, maybe they're social costs, maybe they're sort of underpaid workers. But as we industrialize the world and extend this way of working around the world, the total sum of all those externalities are now causing existential harm to the planet, to society, which are now in the risk of facing a blowback where it comes back to haunt us. It's payback time.
right.
So this now means that collectively we are approaching a point where we have to confront the fact that there isn't a resource out there that can be either extracted for or polluted without concern because nature will take care of that. No, we now need to start to account for the collective externalities of the way that we do things because they're coming back to haunt us and they could crash the whole system. So this has been an area that I've been super interested in, not just the health and flourishing of people, but the health and flourishing of a planet that can sustain a flourishing people. And so, I think we share some interesting thinkers we've been following, like Daniel Schmachtenberger, and looking at the meta crisis, and people like John Vervaeke and the meaning crisis. Why is it that we've got almost exponential levels of poor mental health and anxiety and depression, especially in our young, that threatens to undermine our psychological well-being as well as our physical well-being. And if we continue to perpetuate that, the danger that we destabilize the very world that we're trying to make money in means that the optimizing to get the bottom line as high as possible is a game that's increasingly destroying the substrate on which it depends, which could crash the whole system. And this whole sort of bigger picture view is something I've been considering a lot, almost beyond the work I've been doing in health, to really look at, so what are we doing as a civilization? Because in some ways we need to, our Horizon 1 machine, which is chomping through the world, is reaching the point where if we don't become self-aware of what we're doing, we do risk crashing the whole system. And it's on this question that we had this conversation a while back, which is that one of the big leadership consultancies who were working with one of the top 100 companies in the UK who were doing consumer health products. They were wanting to run a workshop with the executive team to really get them out of this horizon one thinking, to think bigger, think what is the future of health. So I was contacted saying, would you be up for doing a workshop with this executive team to really get them to lift their sights out of the everyday, to think about the bigger story? And my response was, well, how much do you want me to provoke them? Because I can certainly provoke them about the future of health, and they are a consumer company delivering health products. But what about the future of planetary health? What about the future of civilization? Would they be interested in being provoked there? And the response was, yeah, if you can do that, bring it on. So I thought, well, I'm not going to turn this one down. A
All
chance to
right.
present to the executive team of a top 100 company in the UK. So I designed a workshop of three elements. One was, what's going on in the world at the moment? What is the crisis that besets us all in this world? So really talking to them about, we're extracting from nature faster than nature can replenish itself through the resources that we use to make the things we do and the energy that we use. And then we dump the waste in terms of trash and pollution back into the planetary system faster than it can process it. So we're already gone beyond what the Earth's carrying capacity can be, and various groups like the Stockholm's Institute say we've crossed 6 of the 9 key planetary boundaries already, but we're expanding that in economic industrial model around the world. We've tied it to an economic system that needs perpetual growth, which then encourages the industrial system to produce more and more and more, which then causes us to market more and more stuff to get people to buy more things so we can grow the system and grow the economy. So we've attached ourselves globally to a way of being that is auto-destructive of the very planet that we depend on.
Right.
You layer onto that the role of competition versus collaboration. We have lots more competition than perhaps is healthy for us. So if I don't cut down those trees because I recognize they play a role in being the sort of lungs of the world, if you like, in process absorbing the carbon dioxide and producing oxygen, and I want to care for that forest, I might have that sort of noble aim, but my competitor down the road that just sees that as 2 by 2 that I can I can cut down and make money on, they're going to cut it down. And if they're going to cut it down, then they'll get all the money from it. So I might as well cut it down because I want to get the money and not them. So whether it's fishing the oceans or extracting resources from the planet, or we've got this sort of race to the bottom as everyone's trying to maximize their bottom line, but crunching through the resources of the planet in an unsustainable way to do that, generating more pollution and more societal inequalities in that rush to optimize my bottom line for power or money. So we get to the point where our collective action is accelerating the very harm that can crash the system. And lo and behold, we're going to put exponentially powerful technology into the mix in the form of AI, which is going to drive this machine ever faster. So my challenge to these executive teams, having laid out this thesis, is you are a major actor in this story. You have a responsibility to your bottom line, but you have a responsibility to the customers that you serve, the employees that you employ, the society in which you're embedded, and to future generations, maybe your own children and grandchildren. So given those bigger responsibilities, and that we are in this kind of collective madness at the moment, what is yours to do in respect of this as a major player? Discuss. There was a kind of silence in the room, and but then they broke out into conversation, and after a little while they came back saying, well, we're doing sustainability, we were doing some ESG work. That's not going to be enough, is it, Andy? Nope, that's not going to be enough at all.
That's important, just recognizing that.
Just recognizing that. I did another thing. We did a future of health. What does that look like? What they could be? And then I did a third one, which is, given what we've just explored, what are you going to need to do as individuals, executives, and a collective team to think and do differently? Because the thinking and action that got us here ain't going to be the thinking and action that navigates us into that future. So what are you going to do differently?
Yeah.
Discuss. So I was provoking them in the most profound existential way that I could. And the consultancy firm that hired me in called me the next day and said, "What the fuck did you do to this executive?" He said, "I was thinking about like the reaction because it was very positive, and it was almost," he said, that they're a little bit like rabbits in the headlights because what they're doing now isn't really working and they don't really know where to go. So they're twiddling the knobs and pulling the levers of all the things they normally do, trying to squeeze more juice out of it, but it's not working. What you did was shook them to the core. You asked them to go right back to basics. Who are you? Why do you exist? Why should you exist? And how do you take that responsibility of a major actor in a world in crisis seriously? What is it that you're going to do? And what are you going to do to mobilize yourself and your people and your resources to be a force for something better? And that clarity gave them a basis from which to think about themselves that they didn't have before because they were still stuck in that horizon one knob twiddling, lever pulling of the existing way of thinking. You got them out of that to think more fundamentally, more basically, more back to basics and fundamentals. Why do we exist? Why are we here? What's our responsibility? How are we going to do that with honor, dignity, and integrity for ourselves, our people, and the world that we find ourselves in at this moment in history? So what happened a couple of days later, I got another call to say, "Oh, there's a Swedish metals and steels company flying their executive team into London. Would you do the same for them?" And I said, "Bring it on." So I did. The chief exec was, we're in a bit of a crisis. The Chinese are coming for our lunch, and we need to think differently. So go ahead, provoke my team, and we did. And again, another profound reaction. So I've been thinking about maybe there are more executives and executive teams who are ready now, seeing the crisis unfold around the world for a different conversation. Up until now, they just haven't had the permission nor the framing to have this conversation as an executive team. But maybe this kind of provocation is now reached the moment where its time has arrived. And one of the things I'm really looking forward to is exploring whether I could do more of this with more executive teams to see if there's the possibility of creating a real shift in consciousness and a different conversation around our leaders about this moment in history. Because if we keep doing what we're doing, we'll keep what we're getting what we're getting. And there's exponential harms leading to a world crisis. And if we just put AI on to accelerate that, we just run to the edge of the cliff ever faster.
Let me respond to what you have said. And this is why I wanted to have you on here. Um, I I receive what you say with a sense of joy because what you have begun to achieve is what I've seen needing to be done for 50 years.
Mm.
And one of the reasons I stopped consulting almost 10 years ago was I got tired of being lied to by leaders.
Yeah.
Yeah, you like what you're saying, yeah, but they would never do anything, and frankly, it wasn't time, but also it was my own inadequacy as a consultant. I would say I didn't know how to do what you're doing, and that's why I wanted
Yeah.
to elevate this conversation so that people can see what is possible now. And I think it's possible because I think in a certain sense, the stakes are higher than they've ever been. And
Yeah.
in another way, there are no stakes at all anymore.
Yeah.
We can't preserve what we have any longer. We just get to go and try something new. And that is, I think, a wonderful, beautiful thing to be able to do. And so I think what you have described is something a lot of companies could do. I think um, there are ways of marketing what you're talking about. I think getting people to recognize that there are opportunities to this kind of open conversation, and where you don't have to admit you're wrong. We can all say, well, at one level, we've all been wrong. I mean,
Yeah.
but what we can't admit is, well, I'm willing to grow. I'm willing to search and find something new. And there's something, and I would put it in this sense that my world, which is what's up against your world, I'm finding that there is this emerging openness about the world and this emerging wanting to have conversation. And this conversation is not defined at all, and yet people see that something is taking place and they want to be a part of it. And and so what we need are people like you and in all humility, me, who can facilitate those kinds of conversations where people who really have power and people really have skills in leadership and in management and in strategy and all of those things, that they can find a way to take steps forward that both are advancing but also mitigating a lot of the damage which is being created now.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. So, someone shared with me a really interesting archetypal kind of framing for sort of change, which I found quite interesting. It's quite simple, but I think it has some truth to it. And it's the archetype of the shaman, the priest, and the prophet.
Yeah.
Uh, and in this kind of model, the shaman is someone who senses into the depth of reality in a way that is very profound, extremely insightful. We could take sort of Ian McGilchrist and other people like that who have that caliber. They divine something of a deep wisdom that's so pertinent, so needed. But people inside institutional structures and positions of power who are trying to optimize for their bottom line of money or power, thinking about the next quarter and the next year, cannot process this information. How does Ian McGilchrist help me maximize this year's performance? I can't connect
Right.
what he's saying. I know it's wise, but I just can't connect what he's saying to what I'm doing. So if we take the shaman as being sort of the diviner of deep truths that we need to listen to, but it somehow sits outside institutional structures. If we go into the institutions in this archetypal model, we have the priests, the priesthood, if you like, that encircle the power, if you like. And quite a lot of those priests want something better. They do want institutional structures to change, but they work near the seat of power. They're employed by those in power, and therefore there's only so far they can push things before they become a troublemaker and a heretic and you get chucked out. So the priests are kind of frustrated. They have to operate within the constraints of the system, and that they feel boxed in and limited by a kind of way of doing things that reinforces this sort of behavior that causes so much harm. The prophets in this model are someone who can sort of distill the wisdom of the shaman, but be able to speak the language of the system,
Right.
but is not employed by the system.
Right.
So there's a freedom there to speak truth to power that the priests can't. Now, the challenge for the prophet is, how do you get to a position where people will listen to what you have to say and treat you credibly? And also, if you're a prophet, do you take the king's money and just do what they do, their own bidding, like the consultancy companies do? Like, we're not really interested in changing. If we can make money by just reinforcing the existing power hierarchies and make it work a bit better. So my challenge, and it's a narrow line to tread, is to take a step back and see this bigger picture. We're talking about this third horizon, 3 horizons, to see that there is a better way that we could be doing things. So when I'm speaking truth to power, it's not just a critique. You're doing it wrong. You shouldn't be doing this. Look at all the harm you're doing. Yeah. It is, you've got power, but you could be using that power in such a better way that brings about the transformations that make possible the realization of our potential as human beings, as humanity, as societies. This is an exciting time to be alive, with the capacities and capabilities and tools and technologies coming along. So transcend your narrowly conceived, bottom line focused way of thinking to building something better. And in building something better, there's more potential for innovation. There's more potential for work with the potential for a better future. There is so many ways in which a third horizon carefully thought through could yield so much better than you're doing now, and shift the dialogue, shift the orientation, shift the aspiration to we can create a better future if we just have the imagination, creativity, and the courage and the honesty to look at that.
Let me build on that because I totally agree with that, and I've lived in two of those roles, and as a consultant, I was a prophet, and I labeled myself as the intimate outsider. I
Yes.
would come in and I would speak truth to power, not as a belligerent or an activist, but rather as, well, this is the problem that you face, and here is a way to deal with the problem.
Yeah.
You know, and then they say, okay, thank you, but they wouldn't address the problem. And once I really ran that out and no longer really was that role, I've become more of a shaman. And the shaman in this instance, I think, and this is what we need from shamans, is that we need for us to give hope
Yes.
and to say, to not be angry, not be judgmental, not to be critical, but to point to the things which will build strength and build hope and build relationships, build community, and which will then make it easier to say, we don't need to do that anymore because
Mm.
we have some other strengths that now we're relying on that can carry us forward. And that's what I see having happened to me over the last 8 years, and it is really interesting. And it's a and so what I see you being is the prophet. You're a
Yeah.
prophet because you're being asked to come in and disrupt. You know, when I was in seminary, we used to say that we were, our job as pastors would be to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable.
Mhm.
And in a certain sense, that's what a prophet does,
Yeah.
and you're doing that with this approach that you're doing. So I want to kind of bring this to a close, and so I want you to say to people who would be listening, how is it that they can work with you? I mean, there are going to be people all over the world that will hear this, and so how do you want people to work with you? And is it possible for them, all of them, to work with you, or is there a way for them to learn what you're doing in ways that they can kind of self-teach themselves how to do this? Because I think that's ultimately going to have to be the way to do it. Because what are we, 8 billion people? And you
Yeah.
can't deal with 8 billion people. I can't either. And so I see that there's this need to kind of be providing the experiential knowledge in ways that we don't normally think about it.
Well, I'll start off with sort of a framing that I found really, really helpful that I use as a sort of guiding principle through the work that I do. And that's really the work thinking about what kind of world are we building? What kind of world do we want to build? And boiling that down is almost like a relationship between humanity, nature, and technology. To start with humanity, that surely if we're going to develop all these increasing amounts of power and capability, a flourishing humanity has to be something that we would aspire to as a civilization. If we're oppressing more people and causing more harm and suffering to each other, that isn't a world any of us really wants to see brought into being. So there's something quite powerful and almost sacred, I think, about the idea that whatever we're doing as humanity, something of a flourishing humanity has to be part of the story worth fighting for in the future.
Absolutely.
But to have a flourishing humanity, we also need to have a flourishing planet, because the oxygen, the water, the food, the environment that we inhabit, if we destroy the substrate on which we depend on, there is no flourishing humanity. So if we destroy the nature that's bequeathed us by 3 billion years of evolution in our greed to get more stuff, then we collapse humanity. So a flourishing humanity on a flourishing planet. The third piece in that triad then is technology, and technology in terms of techne, not just bits of tech, but everything we've built as humanity to help us, help ourselves. So if we take that broader conception of technology, we can think not just only bits of tech, but things like economic systems, political systems, market systems, health systems, education systems, international supply chains, all of the stuff that we've built. We built it originally to serve us, to create greater well-being. But somewhere along the line, as we built our techne, it's developed its own organizing logic that's become extractive of people and extractive of the planet, to a point where we're now seeing all these crises. And we're going to put exponentially powerful technology in the form of AI into that mix. So the challenge before us, for me, is quite simple. How do we bring our techne back in service of a flourishing humanity and a flourishing planet? Now, if we bear that in mind as a kind of meta North Star, and this is the work I've been doing, what does that mean for the future of health if we think about everything we're doing in healthcare contributing to a flourishing humanity and a flourishing planet? What does this mean for the economy? What does this mean for politics? What does this mean for our education systems? What does this mean for how we build community? Taking this North Star, what is ours to do from whichever part of that landscape you find yourself and whichever part of that project you're able to exert some influence on, having that orientation, what am I doing or what are we doing such that we can contribute through what we're doing to a flourishing humanity and a flourishing planet, invites us to think more deeply. And then by thinking more deeply and honestly about that, what is revealed is a better way of doing things.
Yeah.
So I would implore people to dwell into that and say, well, what's mine to do wherever I am in this landscape?
That's an excellent starting point. And there's, and because unless we kind of massage a mindset change on ourselves individually, the rest of it will be more difficult to understand. But I think that's what you're addressing.
Yeah.
This is really interesting. I think you're one of many people that I'm identifying as being able to sort out a way forward, which is positive and constructive, and does not elicit a violent negative reaction. And that's to your credit, Andy. And I'm grateful for that, and I appreciate you for that. And I think that we're going to see more and more people like that, and they're going to stand out because they're not the angry, bitter warrior, or whatever you want to call it. And I really believe, and this is what I'm seeing from where I stand on the outside of everything. I see a greater openness for conversation and communication, and without having a point, without it leading to something. It doesn't have to lead to something. It just leads inevitably just to building relationships.
Yes, I agree. It's through understanding the other that I get to see what my shared humanity feels and understands, what's important to them. And through that, I get to know myself better. So, and part of that is also looking beyond the surface rhetoric to say, if anyone passionately feels something and holds that passion and is deeply held, there's probably some truth somewhere, some signal in there that's really important. Maybe it's encapsulating a lot of noise and I hearing the noise and therefore I ignore the signal that's in the noise. Can I use my discernment to say what actually underlies this passionate belief? Is it a fear? Is it a wish for something? Is there maybe something in here that if I can distill that out, I now can build a bridge to that person and talk to something about that which really matters in a way that we can co-create something that can hold both of our needs in ways that's generative for something better in the future, rather than descending into me against you, us against them, and then the possibility of conflict and mobilizing our resources and our increasingly in the future our technology against each other, which is a downward spiral that no one wants. It's the
Clearly.
antithesis of a flourishing humanity and a flourishing planet. And we don't want to, we should take care not to participate into that downward spiral. There's an upward spiral that we should all aspire to.
Thank you, Andy, for coming on. This has been great. And we'll put all the information that people need to be in touch with you or to find out
Yeah.
where you're speaking about these things so that they can get a greater sense of what this is all about. And we'll be glad to put that in the show notes.
Great. Well, just to give your viewers a sense of, is what I'm talking about just wishful thinking from someone sitting on their sofa, or to what degree is it possible to have an impact? So Imperial College, one of the most highly rated universities in the world, I think they're currently number 2 behind MIT in the latest rankings, have recently contracted me to be program director for leading systemic innovation in healthcare. So these ideas are now being taken on by the establishment, and I've been invited to participate in delivering programs which include bringing together policymakers, health system leaders, technology companies, pharma companies, to collectively invite them to think about this collective future. So there's a change afoot, and I hope more people listening to this would get some inspiration that it is possible to make change. And if anyone wants to find out more about the work I do and how I do it, please do contact me.
Okay, we'll do that. And thank you. I appreciate you very much. And I thank you all for watching. And I know this, for some of you, this may be overwhelming, but the overwhelming is that this is a picture of where we're going as a society. And this is the beginning. This is kind of the first breaths of a new dawn or a new birth, I think. And I'm excited. It doesn't mean that we're not going to go through hard times, but it does mean that the future has gives us some reason for hope. And this is one of the places that I see that. So please sign up, subscribe, and hit the like button, and leave your questions, because I know Andy would like to see that, and we'll respond to those questions. And grateful for whenever you offer those. And so until the next time we meet for the Eddie Network podcast, I wish you well. And thank you again, Andy, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, Ed, and thank you for this opportunity.